On this vote, the yeas are 224, the nays are 191. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
what purpose is
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
It's the vote on the rule for consideration of two separate environmental bills, one that deals with coal ash regulations, the other with EPA rules. After that, 6 more amendment votes on the Defense 2014 spending bill. And once this series of votes wraps up, the House will get back to consideration of more amendments to that defense bill. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter for a preview. Joining us is Tim Starks with CQ Roll Call. Michigan Congressman Justin Amash has an amendment to this defense spending bill that would end the National Security Agency surveillance program. What is he trying to accomplish?
He is of the mind that this phone record collection program is sort of an unconstitutional violation of Americans' right to privacy. Because the record collects so many records, it's not necessarily going after everyone who might be suspected of terrorism. The idea is to, get enough records so that when you need them, you can, as the NSA, access the records you need to access for an investigation. But they say they have to collect all of those records to be able to go through them when they need them. So there's a big contingent in the House. Some liberals, some Tea Party or libertarian-minded conservatives who think that is a dangerous program for Americans' privacy.
Well, as the amendment comes to the floor, it's got bipartisan support as it comes to the floor. But when it comes time for votes, who have you heard that is now supporting it when the vote comes up?
It's an interesting mishmash. Now, this is a group that's been developing over the last few years. There are people who maybe some staunch conservatives who are more worried about President Obama doing these kinds of things than President Bush was, and there's every indication that this is a program that's been going on for a while. There are those conservatives. There's some other conservatives who are, like I said, of that Tea Party or libertarian persuasion. And then there are liberals who, during the Bush administration and now during the Obama administration, have been worried about national security programs that are overstretching and starting to invade civil liberties in disproportionate relation to how effective they are in stopping terrorist attacks.
NSA officials were on the Hill yesterday in closed-door meetings with lawmakers. What were they trying to say to members of Congress?
There's been a very, very big administration push against this amendment. This was a meeting that was called specifically because of the Amash amendment. And the NSA director, Keith Alexander, was trying to inform lawmakers about the effectiveness of this program as he sees it, and inform them of what the dangerous consequences would be of this program going away. It's unclear how many minds they won over with that, but it's part of a very coordinated push. The White House has spoken publicly against this amendment, which is a very rare thing for them to do. Past Bush administration officials have been talking about how ending this program would jeopardize us and make us more vulnerable to terrorist attacks. So it's a very big push by the Obama administration and even by past Bush administration officials.
Take us back to the cause of all this. What is prompting lawmakers against this NSA surveillance program to pursue the defunding of it in this defense bill?
Well, the defense spending bill is usually a place, any spending bill is usually a place where there's an open rule, and the amendment, any kind of amendment can be offered. So this was a target of opportunity for them in a way to go after it. Now, they almost didn't get their way. They have a structured rule that limited amendments, which is another rare step. But there was a danger that rule wouldn't have passed, and this bill might not have been considered on the floor if this amendment wasn't made in order. So they got their way in terms of a place where they could find a home for it and overcame some procedural hurdles to do it. The original impetus, of course, is that the Guardian newspaper and the Washington Post and some other newspapers have had some revelations about these programs. They were not previously well known with the broad public, and there is some polling that suggests that while it's not 100% or even quite 50%, there's some serious concerns about this with the general public that I think they're partially responding to as well.
There are a couple of other key amendments coming up this afternoon in debate dealing with aid to Egypt and Syria. What can you tell us about those efforts?
So, you know, it wasn't just the NSA amendment that was causing some problems for House leaders, and keep in mind that the House leaders, even the Republican leaders, like Congressman Boehner, are in support of this NSA program. But these other amendments were a little controversial because there's a split in Congress over Egyptian aid, because you know, this amendment that would cut off aid to military aid to Egypt there's a split in Congress over the military coup that happened there recently. Some think that this is evidence that we should be not supporting that Egyptian government, and others say this is going to cause a lot of trouble. If you go through and strip them of aid, it's going to make an unstable situation even worse. The Syria amendment is a little more of a watered-down version of a proposal that was blocked by the rule. So the Syria amendment, it would kind of restate law as it pertains to going into Egypt with any kind of military operation. A more direct amendment that would have said, no, you can't do it, was ruled out of order.
Tim Stark's covering debate in the House on the defense bill for 2014. Read more at rollcall.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Debate on that Amash amendment much later this afternoon. 6 amendment votes coming up after this rule vote on 2 environmental bills. On the Amash amendment, the Associated Press reports the Director of National Intelligence says that effort in the House to rein in the NSA's electronic surveillance program would dismantle a critical tool in the fight against terrorism. On Edward Snowden, and mentioned by Tim Starks there in our conversation, the White House is saying it's, quote, seeking clarity from Russian authorities about his status. Edward Snowden, who leaked the information about the NSA to the Guardian newspaper. The Associated Press says a state news agency in Russia today said that Snowden has been given a document allowing him to leave the transit zone of a Moscow airport. But Snowden's lawyer later said his client's asylum status has not been resolved and he will stay in the airport for now. That's from the Associated Press. So up next, 6 amendment.
On this vote, the yeas.
Mr. Loebsack. Off present. Off present on no for Mr. Loebsack. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Votes aye. Mr. Diaz-Balart votes aye. Mr. Winstrup. Mr. Winstrup votes aye. Votes aye. Still closed.
Got one. On this vote, the yeas are 232, the nays are 188. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to House Resolution 312 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2397, will the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holgren, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 2397, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill making appropriations for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2014, and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Tuesday, July 23, 2013, Amendment number 66, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hanabusa, had been disposed of. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on amendments printed in House Report 113-170, on which further proceedings will postponed in the following order. Amendment number 48 by Mr. Jones of North Carolina. Amendment number 51 by Mr. Lamalfa of California. Amendment number 55 by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina. Amendment number 60 by Mr. Stockman of Texas. Amendment number 62 by Mrs. Walorski of Indiana. Amendment number 65 by Ms. Bonamici of Oregon. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for each electronic vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment number 48, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 48, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Jones of North Carolina.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House spent most all of yesterday considering amendments to the 2014 Defense Department spending bill, $600 billion bill. They're voting on 6 of those amendments now. These will all be 2-minute votes. This first one is by Walter Jones of North Carolina. His amendment would prohibit the use of funds to carry out activities under the U.S.-Afghanistan Strategic Partnership Agreement, which was signed in 2012, without being approved by Congress.
On this vote, the yeas are 177, the nays are 246. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 51, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 51, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. LaMalfa, California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Congressman Doug LaMalfa's proposed amendment to the 2014 defense spending bill would prohibit the Department of Defense from using funds in the bill to pay any fine assessed against a military installation for air pollution emissions by the California Air Resources Board. There are 4 more amendment votes left, and then after that the House moves back to debate over the remaining amendments.
On this vote, the yeas are 235, the nays are 188. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 55, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 55, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The proposed spending bill for 2014 for the Defense Department is nearly $600 billion. This is an amendment to that bill, bipartisan amendment, sponsored in part by Mick Mulvaney, Republican of South Carolina, and Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland. It deals with the sequester. It would reduce the Overseas Contingencies Operation account to the level requested by the President and the Defense Department, except that it preserves the $1.5 billion increase for the Guard and the Reserve. The amendment prevents the Overseas Contingencies Operations account from being used to circumvent the sequester spending caps on defense spending. 3 more amendment votes will follow this, and then the House is back to debate on the remaining amendments to the 2014 defense spending bill, and that includes the amendment later on by Justin Amash of Michigan dealing with the NSA and their ability to collect and store data and phone records. We're getting your input on our Facebook page, facebook.com/C-SPAN. Feel free to post there. We'll read some throughout votes later in the afternoon. Royce posts that most Americans are not in terrorist activity. We should allow for laws to take place and a right for a judge to issue warrants. Also, a couple of tweets. Arrested Aplum says, with this president, the economics are phony. XL Pipeline, Obamacare, war on coal, and the scandals are real. Benghazi, IRS, DOJ, and NSA. USAF vet tweets that finally a vote in Congress on NSA spying on U.S. citizen. Justin Amash puts amendment up to be voted on today. Call your congressman now. And that's from Twitter. And those votes, that amendment will get a debate much later in the afternoon. Votes later this afternoon, sometime after 5 o'clock Eastern.
On this vote, the yeas are 215, the nays are 206. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 60, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Stockman, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 60, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Stockman of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Fiscal year 2014 begins October 1st. This is the 2014 spending bill for the Department of Defense, nearly $600 billion. An amendment to that bill by Steve Stockman of Texas, would prohibit participation by the People's Republic of China in joint U.S. military exercises.
On this vote, the yeas are 137, the nays are 286. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 62, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana, Mrs. Walorski, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 62, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mrs. Walorski of Indiana.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
When the House debated and passed the Defense Authorization Act last month, there was much debate over amendments dealing with Guantanamo detainees. This is the spending bill, the 2014 spending bill for the Department of Defense, and this amendment would prohibit the use of funds to transfer or release detainees from Guantanamo to Yemen. 56 of the 86 detainees have been cleared for release. Cleared are Yemeni. This is a 2-minute vote. One more amendment vote after this, and then back to amendment debate on the defense bill.
Mr. Rogers of Michigan. Mr. Rogers of Michigan votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 238, the nays are 185. The amendment is adopted. The committee will be in order. 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 For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek permission to speak out of order for a moment.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You see this trophy before us. We've been on this House floor many times to celebrate baseball victories, football victories, I should say baseball debacles in our case, but we've celebrated a lot of things, also golf. I want to just point out that we had a wonderful experience last week, Thursday night, with the Washington Castles, who were seated up in the gallery, in the members' gallery. We had a wonderful bipartisan game of tennis between, obviously, the members, Republican and Democrat intermixed, as well as members of the media. And I'm pleased to report to you that there were two teams, the Stars and the Stripes. My colleagues here, Mr. Watt, Ms. Edwards, and Shelley Moore-Capito are on the Stripes, and I'll introduce the Stars team in a moment. Mr. Bishop will do that, but we had a wonderful game. We also should let you know, too, that members of the media played. I should let you know part of our Stripes team included David Gregory of Meet the Press. He's a bigger problem on the tennis court than he is in an interview on Meet the Press. So I just want you to know that. Big serve. Got to watch him. Our coach, Leander Page, who's seated in the gallery, professional, former Senator John Breaux, Shelley Moore Capito, Division I player from Duke. Did I say go Lehigh? That's basketball. Sorry. Peter Cook from Bloomberg, myself, Donna Edwards, Good Sportsmanship Award, Mel Watt, I must say, was one of the most feisty players I've seen. Mark Ein, the owner of the Washington Capitals, who is also here. David Gregory, Jonathan Carl from ABC News, Hans Nichols from Bloomberg, very competitive individual, I might add. But I just wanted to say it was a great time had by all. And I know it's never appropriate to gloat when you win, but we'll do it anyway since we're members of Congress. Here's our trophy. Stripes beat the stars. And at this time, here, we'll hold it up together. At this time, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much. I appreciate my friend from yielding, although I must point out I don't remember Coach Doyle gloating like that when we won the baseball game. But we had a great night, and I was pleased to play with my fellow members Jim Costa and Mike McIntyre and Sherry Bustos. We had two members of the press from Fox News, Ed Henry and Brett Baer. We had two people from the White House, Gene Sperling and Alan Kruger. We had Ben Olson from D.C. United. We had Ambassador Dino Dalal.
The committee is not in order. The committee will be in order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Will continue.
And we were joined by three members of the Castles. We had Murphy Jensen, we had Martina Hingis, and we had Anastasia Rodnova. And I want to yield very briefly to my friend, Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much. I, too, want to thank my colleagues who participated with the Stars and Stripes. Fun was had by all. We raised a good amount of money for charity. I want to thank the Castles for their wonderful hospitality. I got a tennis lesson from my partner, Martina Hingis, but I do have on a reliable source that the Stripes, our opposition, pulled in two ringers from the Main Street media with NBC's David Gregory and Bloomberg's Hans Nichols. These two failed to disclose their professional tennis status in an amateur charitable tournament. So much for press ethics under full disclosure, and I yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, when you talk about helping with education, when you talk about helping food banks, and when you talk about helping our military families, it really was worth raising a racket about. And that's what happened down at the Castle Stadium. We want to thank them for their hospitality. Tennis is a lifetime sport, but this offers a lifeline to those in need in our schools, those who are hungry, and also to our military families. So we appreciate the great opportunity. It truly was a great time to have the ball in our court to do something in a positive way. And with that, I yield back the remainder of the time.
Reclaiming my time, I just wanted to say in conclusion, it was a wonderful cause. Many charities supported. I should also let you know the Washington Castles are playing tonight down at the marina, down at the waterfront. Get down there, watch them. It's not tennis anyone, it's tennis everyone. So get out there and do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The chair will remind members that the rules do not allow references to members of the gallery. Without objection, 2-minute voting will continue. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 65, printed in House Report 113-170, offered by the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 65, printed in House Report Number 113-170, offered by Ms. Bonamici of Oregon.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Another proposed amendment to the 2014 Defense Department spending bill. This last one in the series of votes, Suzanne Bonamici's amendment, would prevent the retirement, divestment, transfer, or preparation to do so of the C-23 Sherpa aircraft, a small military transport aircraft which is used by the Army National Guard, and the amendment would designate $34 million of the Army operation and maintenance account to keep them operationally viable. Once this series wraps up, once this vote wraps up, the House will resume consideration of the Defense Department spending bill. Back to more amendment votes and debate and votes on the floor this afternoon.
On this vote, the yeas are 264, the nays are 154. The amendment is adopted. Good. Don't worry about it. It is now in order to consider amendment number 67, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 67, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Kilmer of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Kilmer, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment seeks to protect the continued employment of needed and trusted Department of Defense civilian employees. DoD civilian employees who are critical to our national security mission may be in danger of losing their security clearances and their jobs if financial hardships from being furloughed result in financial delinquencies. Right now, the DoD has issued vague guidance that they will take into account the impact that sequestration is having on service members' financial situation. While I appreciate those efforts, I believe that Congress should strengthen our commitment to our service members by ensuring no funds are used to deny the renewal of a security clearance to workers who are only experiencing financial hardship as a result of sequestration. I believe that this is a common sense amendment, and it's my hope that it will receive strong support. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington reserves the balance of his time. Purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I claim the time.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the gentleman's intense interest in trying to protect these folks who would be affected by sequestration. But awarding or granting or giving a national security clearance is not a simple thing, and it should not be taken lightly. If the Department of Defense or government agency decides that a person doesn't really qualify, they feel that they don't deserve a national security clearance, if the phrase, and let me quote this, the furlough caused by sequestration is included in the denial, then the denial is null and void. You can't deny it if it's claimed that it's due to sequestration. And that's not fair. That's not fair to our national security. It's not fair, actually, to the Defense Department. And I just think this is not a good idea. But I know what the gentleman wants to accomplish, and would like to work with him to figure out how to do this without denying the Defense Department the right to deny a security clearance to someone that they think is not a good risk for a security clearance. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you. I'd like to yield 1 minute to my colleague from the state of Washington, Mr. Heck.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Congressman Kilmer for offering this amendment today, and frankly for his tireless advocacy on behalf of the men and women in our civil service who support our service members and veterans every day. Without this amendment, hardworking men and women who live in the district I represent also, who work at Joint Base Lewis-McChord, risk losing their security clearance through furloughs that are no fault of their own, thus complicating their employment situation, and we should not let that happen. The issue this amendment aims to resolve, however, is yet another in a long series of issues that show why budgeting by sequestration is frankly just bad policy. I don't think anyone in this chamber actually thinks civilian employees should lose their security clearance because they were furloughed, but the way sequestration was designed makes that a very real possibility. This is a good amendment to fix a bad policy, and I strongly urge my colleagues to support it. And I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the remarks on the specific language of the amendment, and I do hope that we will continue to work through the conference process to address any concerns about the language, because we can all agree that this is a serious issue. It's extremely important that the DoD continues to grant security clearances to employees who are charged with doing critical and sensitive work. There are many factors that the DoD considers when determining if an individual can do these important jobs and to ensure that an employee is trustworthy. Sequestration-related furloughs and any financial hardships that come from sequestration are not an employee's fault. No civilian employee should be denied a security clearance because of Congress's inability to undo sequestration. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and support DoD civilians and the work they do for our country. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, again, I sympathize with what the gentleman is trying to do. It's just the problem if in the denial they use the phrase furlough caused by sequestration, they can't deny that request for a security clearance. And there may be a lot of good reasons why that person should be denied. And so it's a question of, do we protect the national security by giving the Defense Department the authority to deny regardless of what the furlough language is, or do we allow this amendment, which is probably poorly written, and we would like to work with the gentleman to write it in such a way that it doesn't cause us great distress. But I just don't want to see someone who should be denied a security clearance given one because of a technicality. And if the gentleman's prepared to yield back his time,
yes, the gentleman has already yielded back his time. The gentleman has already yielded back his time. So the gentleman from Florida is closing.
He's yielded already, sir. He's yielded.
Is the gentleman prepared to yield back his time?
The gentleman from Washington has already yielded back his time. The gentleman from Florida will close.
Well, then I yield back my time as well, sir.
The gentleman from Florida yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I demand a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 69, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 69, printed in House Report Number 113-170, offered by Mr. Nadler of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment prohibits funds from being used to detain cleared individuals held at Guantanamo. Of the 166 people currently being held there, 86 have been cleared by release. That is, they have not been charged with any offense, they have been found guilty of nothing, and they have been judged by our military to pose no threat to the United States if released. We should release them now. Holding these 86 people who have been cleared for release is against everything we claim to stand for. In response to this very situation, President Obama asked, "Is this who we are?" I hope today we will answer no. We are better than that. I hope we will support this amendment and move expeditiously to support the release of these detainees. It is truly astonishing that in 2013 the United States continues to hold people indefinitely who have not been charged, let alone convicted of any crime, who admittedly do not pose any threat to the United States. They should be released. Guantanamo is an affront to America and to the founding principle of the United States that no person should be deprived of liberty without due process of law. Our continuing to hold prisoners indefinitely, without charge and without trial, is a rebuke to our professed support of liberty. And if they have been judged not to pose a threat, and we hold them anyway, what kind of message are we sending? By what claim of right do we hold people in jail who have been charged with nothing, who we are not bringing to trial, and who we have decided pose no threat to us? What are we saying about the United States and our values? We must change course. We ought to support our amendment. Now, I know that some will say these are dangerous terrorists. No, they're not. They're people who were captured in some way, who have been judged by our military not to pose a threat to the United States, who have not been charged as terrorists, who have not been judged as terrorists. There's simply, some of them may be simply victims of the fact that we paid bounties to people in Afghanistan to turn in people who they said were terrorists. The Hatfields turned in the McCoys because why not? We were giving them a couple of $1,000s. So anyone who has not been charged with a crime, who has not been charged, who has not been convicted, and who we have already decided poses no threat ought to be released. And therefore this amendment says no funds may be used to continue their confinement. I urge its adoption. I yield back. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For all purposes, the gentleman from Florida seek recognition.
I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment would allow and probably require that a very large number of detainees from Guantanamo are sent back home to their home country or a country that they might have come to. They're detainees for a reason. They are detainees because they afflicted harm or danger or threats or death to our American interests, our American soldiers. They came from the battlefield. Now we know that two of the former detainees that have been sent back to their country is a group established and run by two of those former Gitmo detainees. And I don't think it's a good idea. I think we should keep the detainees that are dangerous and until such time as they meet the requirements of the law. They should stay at Guantanamo. They would have to ensure that the remaining Gitmo detainees, who most judge as the most dangerous, will not be released or otherwise brought into the homeland where U.S. citizens could be threatened. Second, they ensure that the present law ensures that prior to releasing Guantanamo detainees to a foreign country, a careful and deliberate assessment must be made that the detainee is not likely to re-engage in terrorist activities. Now, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. So why change it? Why turn these people loose to go back to the battlefield, which many of them that have been released have already done, causing additional harm to our troops? So I'm strongly opposed to this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from our Judiciary Committee for yielding. And I want to say to my very good friend from Florida, the chair of the Defense Appropriations Committee, who I greatly respect, but I'm afraid there's a misunderstanding. This amendment is only about those detainees who have been cleared for release. This is not about the entire 166 people who are there. These are the people who, after a very careful review, have been cleared for release by the intelligence community and by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So we're holding these people without cause. We're holding them for convenience and because we've let our rhetoric get ahead of ourselves. The fact is that they would be released to their countries of origin. Their countries of origin are going to watch them. But these are people who we have found we have no charges, and we have determined they're not a threat to the United States or to anyone else. They shouldn't have been rounded up. They shouldn't have been detained. And they've been detained for 12 years. And 46 detainees are now having to be tube-fed. They're strapped down, and a tube is forced down their nose and into their stomach, and they're strapped for 2 hours so it gets digested. And people that have been cleared for release, we should do this to them? And what's the end game? Are we going to keep them until they die in prison? People who have been cleared for release, And we're just going to keep detaining them until they die? Because that's the only solution from what we're being told. Once they get released, they should be released. Well, who are we as a nation to detain people indefinitely without cause? It doesn't make sense. It's not American. It's a complete violation of our Constitution, the most foundational principle of equal justice under the law. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I continue to reserve.